Tēnā koutou e te iwi whānui, en homaina I o tātou marae maha. Tēnā koutou I ngā aitua o te wā. E oku hoa o te rōpu atu matauenga, e mihi atu rā tēnei kia koutou katoa. Koutou ngā kanohi ora, o tātou hoa maha, kua huri ki te pō. I tēnei wā, mō rātau te honore, mō rātau te koloria. Nā reira, ko rātau kia rātau, ko tātau kia tātau, kia ora hui hui tātau katoa. This is the story of the Māori Battalion, told through the experiences of 5 of our comrades. It cannot hope to be a complete record, but at least it tries to demonstrate the price which these young men were prepared to pay for the privileges of citizenship. It is a story about young people who, along with the other units of the New Zealand Division, contributed to the division's fame. We hope that the young people of today can identify with some of the things which motivated Te Rōpū a Tūmatauenga, the 28th Māori Battalion.
E kore rātau e koro heketia, pēnei a tātou e ora nei. E kore te wā e whakaruruhi, ngā taura nei e whakakore i a rātau. I te urunga mai o te rā, a tainua ki tōna ngarotanga, ka maumahara tātou ki a rātau.
General, Field Marshal, Rommel, e rua te kau māwaru, ngā tamatoa atu matauenga, puta noa I te ao, ka whakatohia, ka whakatapua, ka whakanoa, tēnei karaki e whakamaharatanga, I runga I te inga o te takotoru tapu, te atua matua tō tātou kaihanga, whakanohoia tō waiu tapu ki a rātou, ata whai tia rātou, manaki tia rātou, ke putai tō rangatiratanga mutunga kore, ko ihu kreiti hoki tō mātua riki, āmine. Rānea tōna mai tōro.
The Duke of Gloucester made an inspection of this later bunch of nails in a dictator's coffin. Among the troops inspected on this occasion were many Maoris, men whose destiny is linked with that of the whole British Commonwealth of Nations and who mean to keep it so.
1940 Gourock, Scotland. A Māori battalion arrive in the United Kingdom keen to protect its shores from the Nazi threat. Another step on the great adventure that has caused many of them to leave their tribal homes 17,000 miles away. They bring with them their language, songs and cultural expressions of war, an easy marriage with the British traditions of army discipline. For the duration of the war, reinforcements from New Zealand will keep the battalion's ranks filled with an average of 800 men, mostly young.
We should do the same things as the other battalions. We didn't want to be mollycoddled or anything. Whatever they did, we had to do it too. And, well, at the same time, I think we were feeling that we'll be better than them.
There was no tribal jealousy, was there, during the war?
I don't think so.
There was rivalry, friendly rivalry, but there wasn't jealousy or antagonism.
No. Even competition among platoons, weren't there?
Oh, yes, amongst
I know
companies.
mine was the smartest in the A company.
Oh, yes. Their officer spent too much time polishing his shoes and so on. He was all his spick and span.
I can remember Rangi Logan in charge of headquarters, training headquarters to beat the rest of the companies, and he was very, very disappointed the way they were drilling. And Rangi Logan said, "If you had skirts, you'll be cheap mutton."
Marching on to a parade, you see, the A Company would be, of course, first on the mark, and then B Company would march on again, because when the orders to halt were given, everybody was trying to put on a good show, and you hear A Company say, under their breath, "The penny divers." So then C Company would march on, and you'd hear the Rotorua boys say, "The cowboys." Halt! C Company, halt! The cowboys. And of course, so long along the line.
Fears of an invasion of England diminished. In April of 41, the Maori were rushed from training in Egypt to assist in the defense of Greece. It was a catastrophe. The German forces and Luftwaffe overwhelmed them. Hopelessly outnumbered, they were forced to retreat from their first taste of combat. Attention immediately shifted south to the island of Crete. The battalion followed. The increased use of fighter planes and bombers in World War II meant that those who controlled Crete and her airports would have control too over much of the Mediterranean Sea. The gentle existence of the Cretan people would soon be ruptured by every violation that war could offer.
Noch aber ist England im Besitz von Kreta.
On the morning of the 20th of May, 1941, we were sitting having breakfast under some alder trees just below this mound when we heard a continuous buzz from the sea. And we looked over and the sky was black on the horizon. It was the beginning of the invasion. It was a beautiful sight. And because it was something new, something unique to any warfare, we were dumbfounded, and we looked at the planes in amazement more than anything else. When we got into our positions up here, the planes were flying almost level with the positions we had, and so on, and we could see the doors open with the first parachutists ready to jump and so on, but they flew straight past us, and we couldn't do anything about it, although they were close for any person to shoot at. But above us were fighter planes crisscrossing all the time, only 10 feet above us, so we couldn't do a thing.
Soldier and historian Dan Davin later wrote, "The sight was inexpressibly sinister, for each man dangling carried a death, his own, if not another's." Colonel George Dittmer was given instructions to counterattack. The battalion left their Platanias positions for the German-held areas to the west. As in Greece, confusion. Deadlines to begin the advance came and went. When the advance finally began, there was heavy opposition. They were very, very late. There were no tanks or Air Force support. Surrounded on land, strafed and bombed from the air, they carried on. So did the Germans.
In kurzer Zeit ist der Flugplatz Malmes in deutscher Hand.
The Maleme aerodrome was one of the key areas to the control of Crete. It was an open door for the German occupying army. This hill overlooking the Maleme tarmac was the Maori objective. If captured, no enemy plane would have been able to land. The door would be locked. Contributed to the fiasco that was the bitter Greece-Crete campaign.
First of all, I felt very embarrassed to think that here I am, a prisoner of war, all my voice taken over by someone else. And I thought, you know, I wondered how long I would be in captivity. And sort of feeling of being left behind by the left of the lads. And sadness, I suppose, that no, I wasn't quite sure whether I'll see any of my voice again, ever. Well, that was how I felt at that time.
After 2 years in captivity at various prisoner-of-war camps, Hemi and a handful of other Maori were brought here to the Bavarian town of Eichstätt, to the camp Oflag 7B, the site of the district's police college.
Had my what? Taku kainga la te ri mo ngā tau e rua i te wāpakanga, te mutunga i te wāpakanga la. Had mai tau ki te mātakiti ki haere. Ingali kua huarere ki haere rai nai nei. Aye, this is where I was 50 years ago. Tō mātou, ko tō mātou prenga hutu Paula tēnei rarona. Hasn't changed much down there. Yes, our huts were down there. All the Maori boys were in the huts down there. Hena ringata, tengarangi, unready.
There was little point for Maori to even attempt escape. A brown skin marked them more clearly than any uniform. Better then to accept their position and wait for the war's end. All movements night and day were overseen by the guards, led by Hauptfeldwebel Hugo Zinser.
Auf der Kommandantur, der Hauptfeldwebel, dem unterstanden ein Stab von 120 Offizieren, Verwaltungsbeamte, Abwehrleute und dann vor allem eine große Verwaltung.
This camp, being an officers' camp, it was very, very heavily guarded. Many more guards than any other camp. And most of these fellas were fairly elderly. A lot of them were people who were sent back from Russia, and they had no further use for them in the army as fighters. So they sent them here as guards.
In Welcher Mann war da gewesen? Bitte?
Good day.
Sie waren im Lager.
Grüß Gott. You just said you were here as a prisoner.
Mich werden Sie nicht mehr kennen, wahrscheinlich.
Okay.
Ich bin nicht so viel mit den Gefangenen beisammen gewesen.
Said it's difficult to remember your particular face, but he was always with you all for the whole time he was here. But let me please first of all introduce you. We'll start with the lady. This is Paula Walker.
Ja.
Das ist die Großnichte von Ngarimu vom Zweiten Weltkrieg. Hat die höchste Auszeichnung, the Victoria Cross, gewonnen.
Ja.
Und sie ist dabei, weil Ngarimu, als diese Auszeichnung gewonnen haben, ist gefallen.
Ja.
Herr Zinser.
Ja,
Captain,
schön.
and this is Captain Hemi Wiremu.
Ja. Ja.
This is Canon Wee Huata.
Ja.
He was Reverend,
Ja.
Padre von der Māori
sind
Battalion in
Sie
Italien.
sind Padres.
Yes.
In England? Ne?
In English, der war der Padre, der Reverend für die Māori Battalion in Nordafrika, in Italien.
Italien.
And this is Herr Zinser. He was Master Sergeant here, and as he said, in inverted commas, the most important man in the camp.
Oh, yes.
He was the one who had to give the orders and pass them all on to you all.
Ah, yes,
And
yes.
this is Herr Strauss.
Herr Strauss, nice to meet you.
He was here, wounded on the Russian front, came back and had the good luck, he said himself, to have been told you can stay here, and he was in charge of the post.
Ah, yeah.
The march past. It's hard to say which of the Empire's troops from overseas look best, but they're all good enough to prove better than any the enemy can produce.
The Māori Battalion was a World War II infantry unit. It was made up entirely of volunteers as a result of efforts made by Māori parliamentarians and tribes. As part of the New Zealand division, it saw action in Greece, Crete, North Africa and Italy. One of its most resolute but respected enemy leaders was Erwin Rommel. The Desert Fox considered New Zealanders to be the finest troops on the Allied side. Over 3,500 Māori soldiers fought for God, king and country. 2/3 of them were wounded or killed, contributing to the most grim and final legacy of war. War was a frequent element in the lives of the many societies of ancient Polynesia. Competition and revenge for insults or grievances were the main causes of conflict. In New Zealand, the Maori refined their warlike heritage to take into account the climate and terrain of their new home. The people lived intimately with their environment. This way of life ensured that war was fought in harmony with the seasons, a time to draw sustenance from the land, and a time to fight for it. From birth to old age, men were trained in the skills of warfare. There are no medals.
Tuffy Hag connected. Tuffy Hag joined the channel. Tuffy Hag left the server.
British and colonial troops found in the Maori a staunch adversary. Their physique, fitness, endurance and speed could not be bettered. Their shrewd military tactics so impressed the British that they recorded them and utilized them in wars from the Crimea to the Somme. These traditions of combat, under heavy fire, they battle their way through dense vegetation, guided by a system of irrigation canals.
The morning of the 22nd of May, we arrived above the aerodrome at Malimi and had a good look at the aerodrome, and we spotted a few of the Germans walking around. So I turned around and borrowed the rain gun off one of my boys. Then I got down and prepared to fire, and as soon as I squeezed the trigger, something happened. A bullet, a stray bullet or a bullet from a sharpshooter penetrated the barrel of my gun and split it open, so on, and bowled me over, and there I was. And the first thing I thought about was my mother at home. And then I saw stars, I saw everything, and I thought, oh, this is beautiful. This is a lovely way of dying. And however, I waited and waited, and then I recovered, I suppose, and I stood up, and I looked around. The boy who was firing beside me, he was firing with his rifle, and I thought he had struck me with the barrel of his rifle. However, he was still firing, and then I asked him, what happened? Did you hit me? And he looked up and he said, oh, he said, you were shot. Mind you, he didn't say it that way. He said a few words besides that. And then I fell down again, and the blood started to pour. Prior to that, there was not a drop of blood. And then some of my boys rushed over and bandaged my face and so on, and led me away to the RAP.
The attack failed. Orders came to withdraw. To prevent the exhausted soldiers being cut off by the enemy, the battalion were redeployed east of Hanyā, away from the action, they thought.
Then this is the direction of the counterattack.
Yes, we're right on it, I think. And prior to this, I had just returned to the battalion, but cousin came over to meet me, and we hid among some rushes because he had a can of fruit, preserved fruit. Didn't want any of the other company boys to see us. And lo and behold, we didn't know that the Germans were quite close to where we were until we heard the burst of machine gun fire, and there it was.
What was the reaction of the Germans when the bayonet charge began?
Well, the only thing they could do was to get as much shelter from the machine gun fire and so on. And they all got in behind these olive trees, as you see. Because of the clear path in between the trees, they had to use one tree for 20 men or something in a scrummage formation. And after the attack was over, we had to look, oh boy. It's hard to imagine people still standing on their feet in a scrummage formation. They were so thick that they were held up by the density of their bodies, you know.
German casualties were pretty heavy, so our blokes must have got right into them.
Well, I've seen one of my boys charged with the bayonet, and the tip of the bayonet went right through. One of his friends was so close, he just touched the tip of the bayonet, touched his friend. Well, as you said, Don, there'll be convulsions and I don't know what else. And there's a heck of a lot of shock as far as the recipient would be concerned.
Yes.
And
many times also the when the bayonet went in, they had to fire a round from the rifle to create looseness so they could get it out.
Oh, in most cases, they just put their foot on the body of the opponent and jerk their rifles out. It's not so simple to pull it out because the muscles start to constrict. So, yeah.
The 42nd Street bayonet charge drove the Germans back nearly a mile, killing over 80 of them. Among the victims were cretins who had befriended the Maori and who had been used by the Germans as human shields. The battle for Crete was lost. The New Zealand and Australian men wearily trudged the mountainous route to Svaikja, where the Navy would evacuate them. The Germans were too late to prevent the escape, but found nearly 6,000 men left behind. There had not been enough room on board for everyone. The final ignominy of failure.
It was terrible as far as we were concerned. Prior to deciding who were going to stay and so on, people were saying, well, you're married, you go, and so on. But the officers had the last word. We felt sad for them, and they felt sad for us because they thought, well, we might get bombed anyway. But when we got on the ship, we were so pleased to get away from Crete, we forgot the others until we got back to Alexandria.
Η συνεισφορά των Γερμανών στη μάχη της Κρήτης ήταν πάρα πολύ μεγάλη. Μόνο να σκεφτεί κανείς ότι τόσες χιλιάδες μίλια μακριά από την πατρίδα τους βρεθήκαν εδώ να πολεμήσουν μαζί μας. Δεν μπορεί να το περιγράψει δηλαδή κανείς πόση μεγάλη συνεισφορά μας έκαναν. Και ακόμα εδώ σε αυτή την περιοχή μπορώ να πω πως ήταν αποκλειστικά έργο δικό τους όλοι οι Γερμανοί που σκοτωθήκαν εδώ. Διότι οι δικοί μας δεν μπορούσαν να πλησιάσουν. Πολλά αεροπλάνα αυτοί βρεθήκαν εδώ, είχαν κλειστεί και όπλα εμείς δεν είχαμε μόνο από τις άκρες, μακριά από το αεροδρόμιο. Όλοι οι Γερμανοί που σκοτωθήκαν εδώ γύρω στην περιοχή οφείλεται εις τους Νεοζηλανδούς που υποστηρίζανε το αεροδρόμιο και το ύψαμα τούτο. Ο πόλεμος γενικά είναι μια καταστροφή, ένα κακό πράγμα βέβαια. Αυτό οφείλεται στη μεγαλομανία και στα συμφέροντα των μεγάλων, των τρελών, αποκλειστικώς. Που σκοτώνονται άνθρωποι που δεν ξέρουν καλά για ποιο σκοπό σκοτώνονται. Και εμείς είδαμε σε αυτό.
Were passed down from generation to generation and were suddenly rekindled by a spark which ignited worldwide conflict. The Maori people were determined to play their part in their own way and began recruitment of a fighting unit ready to take up arms beside the Pākehā, their European counterparts.
It was amazing the number of people who came along to volunteer their services. It was some sort of look forward to excitement, going abroad and this sort of thing. So they came in their hundreds in the particular places we went to. On their horses, tie their horses outside, and one of my jobs was to drill them, give them sort of elementary training and sort of standing at ease, up to attention, slope arm with a broomstick and this sort of thing. And that made them very, very happy. And of course they were faking their ages and how old are you? Oh, 21. Some of them were 50. Are you married? No. And they had about 3 or 4 children. You know, it was really amazing.
There were 6 brothers in my family, but it wasn't an isolated case. There were many cases of Maori families who had 6 and 7 sons that went to the war.
There were the one-son families, and that was very difficult. I was one of them, and there were only 2 of us in the family, a sister, and the first thing my dad said when we were having tea, when New Zealand declared war against the Germans, he said, there's plenty of time. That's all he said, plenty of time. And I thought to myself, well, it's going to be hard, all right? And I felt sorry for my mother. If I was to join, there'll be only 2 people left at home. However, when my friends started going for medical and so on, I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to be left behind. And it was a hard decision to make, to go to war.
Strict training under superb Pākehā leaders commenced. An initial problem was with the World War I uniforms issued.
And old Freddie Jones had to laugh. Yeah. And he said, oh, well, of course, he said, those uniforms are made under English specifications. See, they were built for Englishmen, not for New Zealanders. Or Maoris in particular. And you see these tight pants, you know, they couldn't hardly get their legs through them. And the sleeves were right down here, and the coats right down to the knees. And
Dad's army.
And they issued them with berets to match. Oh, yeah, well, it looked terrible. Now, those boys had to turn around and spend what little money they had to take them to some tailor and get them altered. And within a week or so, they were looking quite smart again.
In a deliberate move to ensure that the battalion be Māori in identity as well as name, it was divided into tribal companies. A company was made up of North Auckland tribes. B Company from Rotorua, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and the Coromandel. C Company comprised East Coast tribes, notably the Ngāti Porou and Rongo Whakaata. D Company covered a wider area where there were fewer Māori: Waikato, Hawke's Bay, Taranaki, Wellington, the South Island, Chathams and Stewart Island.
They parade again, 2,000 members of the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force in Wellington before leaving for service overseas. For the second time in a quarter of a century, the manhood of the Dominion has heard and answered the call to imperial duty. So this is goodbye, good luck, and a safe return.
The ship, I suppose it was supposed to carry about 2,000 people. And when we left New Zealand, we had 4,000 troops. And it was hard on the men. As far as the officers were concerned, of course, we had the deluxe accommodation and dining room and cocktail rooms and so on. It hadn't been changed in any way whatsoever. And it was a beautiful ship on top where the lounges were, but not down below. It was too cramped. And some of the men, of course, were below 2 decks, I think, below water level. And whenever I was on duty, I didn't feel like going down to the bottom decks. You had to go down and see a man, and the conditions weren't too good.
The original destination of the troopship Aquitania was Egypt, where training would commence with New Zealand soldiers of the first echelon already there. The racist policies of South Africa meant that, for the Māori, leave in Cape Town was limited. During their period in South Africa, the evacuation at Dunkirk took place. An invasion of England appeared imminent, and the convoy changed course from Egypt to Britain.
Well, the main thing, I suppose, is the route march we had every day. We just about walked to England. Every day we went round and round the ship, and it was a big ship. And going round it, oh boy, it's mighty long. We felt as if we walked to England.
The relationship between the Pākehās and Maoris was terrific. They got along very, very well together, no respect. In fact, Pākehās, I think, were nearly as bad, if not worse, than the Maoris for getting into mischief.
I think it was a normal relationship at home, you know? Yeah. There was no difference. As a matter of fact, it was great. No difference whatsoever. Yeah. It was beautiful.
We had, I think, about 5 senior nurses on. They were the only women on board. And as time went on, you know, when the war to 6 or 8 weeks altogether, these nurses looked prettier and prettier as the journey continued.
You better not say how.
No, but, you know...
It was all fear. I mean, you had fear of being wounded, fear of being maimed, fear of being killed, fear of letting your troops down, your side down, fear of being defeated. It's just one whole mass of fears.
It's only when you given notice that you are going to do a certain attack, you have fear, right? I mean, I just can't understand anybody not having fear. But there are so many things you have to do prior to that attack. You forget about fear. You forget it. And by the time you get to the start line and you're ready to attack, you're lost, absolutely lost as far as fear is concerned. You concentrate on what you have to do after that. With the result, you do the job without worrying. You do worry, but you keep on going.
You know, I used to feel sorry for our officer, for the Māori officers. While the soldiers are crawling on the ground, you know, they expect the officer to stand. He's supposed to be extra. And I used to admire these fellas, keeping the morale. Yeah. And those who are leading the Māori Battalion, they have to boost their men up going forward.
Destroying the enemy is a reality of war. When the killing happened at long range, it could be very impersonal. The delivery of death at close range was not so easy.
My two subordinates and myself went down some stairway into a concrete air raid shelter. And in the shelter was a German officer and 2 Italians. And as I stepped off the last step of this stairway, I noticed that the Italian, who had his hands up, and they all had their hands up in a camarade position, had a red object in his hand. I knew immediately that it was an Italian grenade. They painted all their grenades red for some reason or other. And so I had to shoot the 3 of them, Tommy gun. And that was my first introduction to killing, as we put it. And it was it was very sad, actually, a sad moment, because I went through the captain's belongings and personal effects and found a picture of himself and his 3 lovely children. And this was a very traumatic moment for me because one soldier relates to another.
At the beginning of the Desert Campaign, the Germans seemed certain to overwhelm the Allies. Rommel's progress was hampered by difficulties with supplies and was finally arrested at El Alamein when they were forced to retreat. Individual stories of heroism abound. At Miterea Ridge, stretcher bearer Corporal James Pirihi braved intense shell fire to tend to the wounded and bury the dead. Once, in the face of enemy machine gun fire, he dressed the wounds of a German soldier and carried him to safety. At Gazala, Private Charlie Shelford saved his encircled platoon. He ran 300 yards toward an enemy machine gun post, shooting from the hip. Despite taking shrapnel from 3 grenades and having his own gun smashed, he grenaded the enemy position and began the collapse of resistance in that area. From the Libyan campaign onwards, Mr. Charles Bennett, a Pākehā civilian, was in charge of Te Reo Aroha, a mobile canteen given by the Maori children of New Zealand. Charlie Y.M. drove the beloved van in the fiercest of battles to keep the men supplied with cigarettes, sweets, razors and other goods from home.
Wir haben vor El Alamein haben wir Maori-Soldaten gefangen genommen. Das waren gute Kämpfer, das wussten wir. von der Infanterie. Ich war nicht Infanterie, ich war Panzeraufklärung im Spähwagen. Und wir haben das gewusst von der Infanterie, dass sie sehr harte, gute Leute waren.
Ja, das waren schon tapfere Soldaten und wie gesagt gut ausgebildet. Denn Minen, das war immer ein teuflisches Geschäft, mit Minen zu arbeiten. Und sie müssten so gut ausgebildet gewesen sein, dass denen nie was passiert ist. Manchmal ging doch eine Mine hoch beim Verlegen, wenn man ein Zinder kam oder irgendetwas. Und die Maoris haben die Minen da ausgegraben, noch auf die Seite gelegt, ohne irgendwie anzugreifen. Entweder war das eine Art Sport oder wollten sie uns ärgern oder irgendetwas. Auf alle Fälle ist an sich gar nichts passiert, kein Angriff von Maoris, sondern nur die Minen ausgegraben, auf die Seite gelegt und am Morgen waren sie wieder weg.
The push northwards to meet the First Army in Tunisia continued. When a pass was found which would enable the Allies to outflank strong fortifications, the battalion went in. The battle for Tobago Gap started with heavy artillery and air support. Colonel Charles Bennett assigned C Company under Peter Awatere to take a German-held feature point 209. From the base of a hill later called Hikurangi, Lieutenant Wanangarimu led his platoon straight up the steep rocky slopes. He single-handedly wiped out 2 enemy strongposts. His kinsman Corporal Wiwi Teneti kept 2 machine gun nests quiet until his men could outflank and destroy them. From only yards away, the Germans charged with their bayonets. They were repulsed. By nightfall, Awatere and Ngarimu were both wounded. They refused to seek attention and held back repeated bayonet charges. Only when his wounds reduced him to crawling about did Awatere agree to get medical assistance. Ngarimu stayed. Throughout the night, he kept his men awake and alert for continual German attacks. Each time they were driven back by bullet, bayonet, and even stones used as makeshift grenades. On and on the battle went. Both sides were mauled by horrific casualties. Through the carnage, Ngarimu exhorted his men to greater effort. At daybreak, he was killed during an advance, his body falling on top of those he had just shot. The German casualties became insupportable. Appeals from them for medical aid signaled the beginning of the end of the battle. Ngarimu's leadership and bravery inspired Colonel Bennett to recommend him for the Victoria Cross.
We took him back to the cemetery, already prepared, and laid him to rest there. Well, you know, it's a sad occasion when you spend all night fighting and then you have to turn around and bury your comrades. And looking back on it, I still get very emotional about it. It's a thing that I'll never forget. And I don't think any soldier who served over here, overseas, will ever forget the war. A lot of people say that the war is over. It's been over nearly 50 years, but to a soldier, it'll be there always. You can't take that away from them. And being back here, I can see all the battle in operation. The dive bombers, and especially remember the pilots that failed to pull out of their dive and go crashing into the hills across the way there. And then the tanks and the infantry riding on the tanks and the infantry falling off as they're being shot at from the Germans. All those things, even and our own chaps going into the shells and chaps wounded. You never forget those things.
Tactics had to be found quickly.
Well, there is confusion, all right, but at the same time, every man attacking would try and get into position as best they can. And it is very difficult, but in the main, we seem to get to our objective altogether. And that was the main thing about it. But in this instance, the Takruna hill up here was a big obstacle.
لا نحلف البقرة والعجايل يرضعوا والكعبة ضربت في الحيط. هي ضربت في الحيط، هي مجية علي قريبة. وأنا هربت ولدي منها، خليتك الحلاب والبقرة والكل. وهربت طبيت للبيت.
وانت شكون تعمل؟
ايوه كيف يدهم علينا المان. الانجليز وخر التالي والمان حبس حدان.
وانت شكون تعمل الوقت هذاك؟
نطيبوا فطورنا. اخي نطيبوا فطورنا والله العظيم فطورنا رأس بالله حد كتوك. والمان شد هنا نحن جينا في الوسط هربنا. ما بقدرنا ما قدرناش. اما مرتاح ورانا مرتاح قدامنا ونحن نجار وعربي. البلاد كلها مشكلنا.
Takruna was a massive rock edifice which dominated the surrounding countryside. The Italians and Germans intended to hold it at all costs. B Company's part in the assault involved Sergeants Manahi and Rogers. With about half a dozen men each, they fought their way up Takruna's awesome sheer face. They took the village on top, but the enemy soon counterattacked. Manahi climbed back down and returned with reinforcements. There was a desperate battle. Soldiers were shot, bayoneted, and pushed over the cliff. For 2 days, Takruna was hidden in the haze of battle. Its capture by the battalion caused England's General Horrocks to remark that it was the most gallant feat of arms he had witnessed during the war. Decorations highlight individual heroism, but hide the fact that the Māori Battalion always fought as one, becoming a startlingly effective fighting unit.
In the Māori Battalion, all the men we had were nothing but the best. They were second to none. And whatever decorations the officers have in the Māori Battalion belong to the men, to the battalion as a whole.
Well, I wonder why he joined the war. I know I wouldn't have. If I was a man that age and it was voluntary, I wouldn't have joined it. I see when he gets mentioned that I can see the hurt in Nanny's eyes, and I feel sorry for her. And I have to think, just like every other company, C Company is just like every other company. And I know it's had the highest casualty number. Most people were wounded. It just makes...
...who inflicted the most casualties. At Pascuccio, Corporal Henry Barrett scaled a cliff and destroyed a machine gun post. His men then fixed bayonets and wiped out other positions. Barrett himself killed 9 Germans. Captain Monty Wikirifi displayed magnificent leadership and tactics at Cassino before being severely wounded. He refused to imperil his men by being carried out. With shattered legs, he dragged himself along the ground under fire for 15 hours to safety. For 2 days on the outskirts of Popiano, under very heavy shell fire, Captain Tomwana ran between platoons, rallying and urging them on until the enemy tanks and infantry withdrew. On 4th of August, 1944, the liberation of Florence.
Our interest in Florence was exciting. I was with Colonel Owatere, and we were on the jeep, and it was sort of a competition between the 23rd Battalion and the 28th Battalion to enter Florence. And it came over the air for the battalion to take cover. Just came over. And we took cover, and then they rained the place with shelling. And I was an eyewitness to many, many of the people who came out to meet us. Guy, children, women. But none of us got killed there because we understood it and we took cover.
The Māori soldiers and the Italian people rapidly acquired a liking for each other. They found much in common with communal lifestyles and a joint love of song.
ricordo che c'erano dei Maori.
The Maori proved adept at learning the languages of whichever country they found themselves in. The Maori language, too, became a code which could not be broken by German intelligence. In Italy, there was humorous confusion over the Maori habit of greeting the locals. The Maori "Kia ora" sounded very similar to the Italian for "What's the time?"
Un altro uomo disse, ma questi Maori sono quelli che dicono sempre che ore sono, che ore sono. No, because a man, two men, two Italian old men. A Maori pass from there. Che ora, che ora? And so the one man said, oh, it's 9 o'clock. After 5 minutes, he came back. Che ora, che ora? I told you it's 9 o'clock, but now it's 5 past 9.
Helping out the wounded, then we came across this area where a Pākehā fellow was under a carrier. Leg. And so my rabbi said to me, Padre, we got 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And we must get out of this place. So the I grabbed something, it looked like an axe to me anyway. So I just grabbed hold of it and cut his leg off. And threw him onto the jeep, and when no sooner we pulled out, down came the shelling. So we got over. Then Ravidi said to me, "Ehua, korora tau?" You know that A company language. And I said, "Yes." We nearly died, eh? However, and as far as I was concerned, there was no hope for this fella because he was bleeding. And the thing like that, and I never come across him till many years after I was taken in Anzac in Waitara. And who should turn up was this fella. I did know him, and he just said to me, or he introduced his wife. This is the man that saved me. That's it. And when he mentioned fire, as soon as he said the crossroad, off I went, and just told the story. I said, well, I'm glad that we're back. But many experiences like that took place, because never. And then when you had to tie up, look, the fellowship or the brotherhood in the Pākehā Māori was just so, just so.
This pig is for the Māori Battalion, and to her new owner, she shows an almost dog-like devotion. Bringing home the wine is a responsible job. The first step in turning pig into pork, and for the onlookers, quite a cheering sight. After weeks and months on tinned bully beef, this is certainly a sight worth watching. Tomorrow will be a lovely day.
The classically beautiful city of Florence was a warm host to the Māori Battalion, as were its citizens. Fighting in the desert had not generally affected the local populations. In Italy, however, the presence of so many people living in and around the battlegrounds meant difficulty for the soldiers and danger for the innocent. The Maori soldiers had a belief in their ability to fight, as well as a deep belief in God and the hereafter. The 5 padres who served with the battalion were vital to the men's morale.
You got plenty of belts to sell.
Yes, good prices for you.
Good?
Yes.
Discount?
Sure. 10% discount today.
Oh, that's very good.
Because it's cloudy.
Cloudy.
Yeah.
At the age of 26, Wee Huata was in the front line, comforting the wounded and ministering to the dead. War forced him to redefine his faith.
Do you like this place?
Sure. It's fun.
Very good.
It's fun to sell to people. My stuff have 6 months guarantee.
Guarantee. I was quite clear in my mind to destroy the enemy, so I prayed that way. And I firmly believe that the Māori Battalion should go home alive. And so my prayers went that way. Destroy the enemy so that we could get home to New Zealand quickly and everybody alive. And so when the fellow used to say to me, "Hey, Padre, what about that part down so I'm not killed?" I said, "Oh, don't worry about that too much." I said, "Either you or him."
We were always prepared spiritually, and when we went into battle, we felt we had somebody watching over us. And when we came up against the enemy, well, it was either him or us. And I'm sure he felt the same way about it. That was the story behind it. And without that spiritual build-up before, and if we ever went into battle without it, well, we felt there was something wrong. We weren't the same troops. That's how I felt it, and I'm sure the boys felt the same way.
Well, although I was behind barbed wire at that time and I wasn't with you fellas, my prayers were always for you and the battalion to get home safely, whatever happens.
The Benedictine Monastery, founded in 529 AD, overlooked the township of Cassino. It was thought to contain German snipers. In one of the most remembered but also futile decisions of the Italian campaign, this sacred place of God was delivered of 600 tons of high explosives. Before their attack on the Cassino railway station, the Māori soldiers of A and B companies gathered together in the warm dusk of a beautiful day. They attended to personal matters. Some wrote letters, while others cleared their pockets in case of capture. When the Padre arrived, there was a feeling amongst the two companies that this battle was going to be tough. They were not to know that of 200 men, only 70 would return to fight again. The Padre called them to prayer and said, "Father, look down upon us this moment. Help us to do that which we have to do. Tonight, take those that you want. Tomorrow, let us weep those that are left. Through thy Son, Jesus Christ, let us go on." The drive to push back the enemy continued through a grim Italian winter. The Germans were stubborn in resistance, and the final battles were a cataclysm of bombardment and hand-to-hand combat. War in Europe for the Māori Battalion ended in Trieste. It was now time to reflect on their contribution to victory.
They asked the government with the thought that we should be like the other battalions, the people who have already proved themselves, and that, of course, are the Europeans in New Zealand. And when the war was over, I felt so proud of our battalion because we achieved the wants of our elders through the deeds of the Māori Battalion. And all I can say is that I'm quite proud to have been a member of such a battalion.
On the 23rd of January 1946, the Māori Battalion arrived home in Wellington, preceded by their reputation as enthusiastic and fearless warriors, also known for their humour and fellowship. They carried with them the guilts and horrors of their war, but a pride too for having taken a full part in the struggle for New Zealand's future. The camaraderie they had forged would endure over all the years and outlive many of them. But now, it was a time for their families.
Well, my daughter was born while I was overseas, and when I came back, she was nearly 4 years old, and I met her at the wharf in Wellington, And I stood and looked at her, and I called out to her, and she got a bit shy. She stuck her finger up to her mouth like that. And the mother said to her, "Go and say hello to Daddy." I called her, and she rushed over to me and gave me a hug, and she said, "You've been a long time," she said. I said, "I know."
Individual tribes welcomed their remaining sons home. They returned victorious children of the god of war. In the relief of celebration, the Maori grieved for the loss of so many men. They grieved too for their grandchildren, for in the coming peace, they would not know the influence of the lost leaders who could have passed on the traditions and disciplines of their culture.
What it means to me, those fellas I have buried, never will I forget them. It makes me extra thankful and grateful that God has spared me to bury them and remind me of the fellowship we had. I'm really, in my heart, never will I forget to thank them for giving me the chance to live.
Those who perished for Crete lie in the Suda Bay Cemetery, including Don Stewart's brother Horton, who was shot less than 2 miles away. The First World War had occurred in an age when it was considered inappropriate for coloured races to be fighting with or against white people. Maori involvement was accordingly restricted. In the Second World War, however, they were treated as equals and became a vital part of the cutting edge of Allied efforts to repel the Nazis. In 1943, Sir Apira Nangata wrote that the assets of the Maori in war ought to be equally recognized as assets in peace, and that his people's sacrifice was the highest price of citizenship.
It's half a century since Horton and I said farewell to each other at the outbreak of war. And then my mind reverts back to pre-war, when Horton was such a vital person. When he was killed so early in the peace, it really devastated the family. I would like to say to Horton that I'd love him to have been with me in life over the last 50 years, to have lived his life through, because there's no telling what he may have been.
Hare koutou. Fo patorino.
Horton.
katoa Te aroha pu mautonu Aha kua te iti noa Pirikau mai anō
Well, it's just that I feel honoured and thankful, I suppose, to the Lord for being a member of that group, the 28th Māori Battalion.
Kakapatomi nā mai Au e te aroha Hira hira mai Whakaiapo
The young Maori people today are exactly the same as we were at that time. They have still the brave hearts, the fortitude, etc. that we had, but they still have those elements within them.
E taku taupu mau E taka moritanga Taka mori e Taka miri
And when you get 18 men playing and their own style, and the Italians loved it. They said they never heard such singers out of the word. And because the only song they used to sing, Buonanotte mia amore, good night my love. Buonanotte mia core, good night my heart. Sonia tutte me baci, I dream of many kisses. Sonia solo di me, I dream only of you. Buonanotte mia amore, good night my love. Chi vedremo domani, tomorrow we'll meet again. Per torna più felice del cuore, I will return to your sweetness. And buonanotte mia amore, and we all say, we all come in. Good night, Mum.
Battalion march to victory. Mighty battalion, staunch and true. Mighty battalion, march to glory. Take the honor of the people with you. And we'll march, march, march to the enemy. And we'll fight right to the end. For God, for King, and for country. Oh, and and we'll march, march, march to the enemy. And we'll fight right to the end. For God, for King, and for country. Oh, and